Three, two, one. Welcome to the Planning, Zoning, and Historical Committee for Tuesday, June 9th. We are going to start with a roll call. And so those of you playing along at home, if you will unmute yourself, you know the alphabet, so get ready. And those of you here in the chamber, I will go ahead and say, you can just go ahead and say you're here, just to pretend like we're participating like normal. So we'll start with Council Lady Benedict.
Present.
Gotcha. Russ Bradford is here. Councilman Cash is here. Council Lady Evans. Okay, I'm not seeing Council Lady Evans, sorry. Council Lady Gamble is here with us. Councilman Hager is in the chamber. Councilman Hall is on the other side of the screen from me. Councilman O'Connell, Councilman Parker, Councilman Rutherford, Council Lady Stiles, looking very stylish today. Council Lady Toombs, I think she was maybe going to be running late with childcare. Council Lady Van Reese, I see online. Council Lady Welch, I see online. And Councilman Withers, I see him listed online. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that this committee meeting agenda constitutes essential business of the Metropolitan Council, and that the meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 outbreak. I would like a second, please. Thank you. All those, if anybody is wishing to vote no on this motion, please raise your hand virtually or physically now. Seeing no objections, that motion passes. Item number 2 on our agenda, second substitute BL 2019-48 by Councilman Rosenberg, Zach Young, Colby Sledge, Joy Stiles, and Zolfat Swara. Amends the Metro Code relative to home occupation. Council Lady Stiles, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move forward.
Thank you. I will second that. And so I will go to the sponsor for an explanation. Councilman Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as substituted prior, and I'll get into the amendment in just a second, this legislation does a number of things. It reduces the enforcement burden on codes by allowing them to focus on bad actors instead of grudges and complaints targeted at invisible home businesses. It tightens regulations on noise, on commercial deliveries, on uses, and on requirements to preserve the residential nature of a property. It adds requirements that comply with HOA bylaws, condominium covenants, and the like. It allows a limited number of clients to visit the home business by appointment during specific hours, and it adds the ways in which enforcement can take place by permitting photographic and video evidence. The amendment further adds a series of protections to prevent any person or entity from operating more than one business out of a home in Davidson County. It also tightens up the definitions and uses that are permitted in the earlier versions of this bill, and adds limitations that don't exist under current code for the types of businesses that can operate. So with that amendment, I think that summarizes where we are.
Great. Thank you for that explanation, Councilman Rosenberg. Council Lady Stiles.
I'd like to move the amendment.
Council Lady, that might help to turn your mic on.
I'd like to move the amendment, please.
Thank you. I will second. That amendment would be Rosenberg's amendment to the second substitute. So that's a motion properly seconded. I'm going to go back to the sponsor to explain his amendment to the second substitute.
So this amendment kind of does those last couple things that I explained. Rather than depending on the definitions in code for personal instruction, general office, personal care services, multimedia production, and artisan manufacturing, we move those definitions into this section of code and also limit those definitions a little bit more than they are elsewhere in code. We also add prohibitions for home occupations, regardless of whether you have customer visits. That prohibits the manufacture or repair of automobiles, the repair of equipment that takes place outdoors, and the outdoor storage of construction scrap or salvage, which keeps you from being a scrapyard in a residential home. The limitations that I mentioned as far as limiting what kind of entities can operate businesses, there are kind of four pieces to this. It says that the owner of the property has to be an individual. This bit that I'm about to talk about only applies to businesses that allow clients to visit. So it says that the owner of the property has to be a natural person or trust. It can't be an LLC or something along those lines. The applicant needs to either be the owner of the property, be a relative of the owner of a property, or have at least a one-year lease on the property. Only one permit can be issued to a property owned by each property owner, and no person may be issued more than one permit anywhere in the county. And then there's just a little technical correction, which is that final two of the other bullet points, but that's what it does.
Great, thank you, Councilman. I want to confirm that a commitment that we made at the Planning Commission was that you were going to hold a community meeting. Can you just run through that again for us? I know we've discussed it before, but can you give the
Sure,
dates and how you engaged the community?
Sure, we had an hour-long town hall on the 28th of May. It was available via Zoom. It was publicly noticed. It was also accessible on Facebook, advertised widely. It was very well attended. We got both a Facebook during and after the fact, and then via the Zoom connection. We did some polls to get feedback, which, largely indicated that, that we're in a good place because a few people wanted it tighter and a few people wanted it wider open. So that was very comforting. And then, so it was very well attended. We got a lot of questions and comments throughout that I addressed. That video is still posted and accessible on my Facebook page, my council Facebook page. And I'm really pleased with the engagement that we got throughout.
Wonderful. Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate that you have that still available on your Facebook page, so those of us who get any questions, we will be able to just link to that and share with our neighbors. So I appreciate your upholding that commitment through these difficult times to the Planning Commission. So is there any questions on the second, the Rosenberg Amendment to the second substitute, or any discussion? Councilman Bradford. Oh. How do you speak? His name's not up here. Do I have to just guess? 3 back? See if that's you. Try it. Yeah, there we go.
So my question, maybe the sponsor can answer this, or Director Cooper, is since these home businesses would be basically commercial operations allowed in residential areas, they're still only paying residential property tax. So is there going to be how are we going to collect the appropriate amount of taxes on a commercial entity that's operating in a residential area?
Madam Chair, may I?
We can go to, sure, Councilman Rosenberg.
Okay, we currently have commercial operations in residential neighborhoods. It's been permitted under code since, well, forever, basically. This does not modify that. The way properties are assessed is under the purview of the property assessor, from my understanding. So this does not touch how businesses are treated currently or in the future.
Councilman Bradford.
So what you're saying is anyone operating a home business is paying the commercial property tax, or are they paying the residential property tax?
Councilman Rosenberg.
They're currently paying the residential property tax unless the assessor has, for some reason, decided to assess at a commercial rate.
Do you feel that's fair for commercial businesses that are operating as a commercial business in a commercial area, paying commercial taxes. Now they're competing with someone in their home paying less taxes and able to undercut them when it comes to competition.
Councilman Rosenberg.
Again, this does not change what the current thing is. Regardless of what my opinions are on what we currently do or should do in the future, right now that is the case. However, I would add that people operating in commercial areas have far more rights as far as their business than anybody operating out of their home right now, including myself. You do not have any of these limitations that I've talked about or any of the existing limitations when you operate in a commercial area. So that's something that, again, this bill does not speak to in one way or another.
Thank you. Councilman Rosenberg, I don't want you to speculate too much on taxes or some of the reasoning behind Metro government, I guess, but is the reason that they are assessed at the residential rate is because the primary use is a residential purpose opposed to a commercial purpose, and that is why it is a residential rate, because the commercial use is the accessory use. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, given the limitation on the percentage of your home that can be used for a business, that's right. I don't know if the assessor ever splits properties into different uses. If that were something that they were going to pursue and charge businesses at 20%, I'd be receptive to that, but that's not under the purview of the Metro Council. But yes, Madam Chair, it's because the commercial use is an accessory to the residential property.
Thank you, Councilman Rosenberg. Council Lady Gamble. Oh, hell, I'm sorry. Try again.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask the sponsor, Councilmember Rosenberg, if you could repeat again. You mentioned the business classifications that would qualify under this, and you mentioned, I think it was sole proprietor. It was LLC not included or included?
A home owned by an LLC would not be able to have clients come visit a business.
Okay, so that kind of speaks to the earlier question about commercial properties. These are residential properties operating a sole proprietor, small independent business, not a commercial business, a LLC, or any type of business like that.
Correct, and the person operating the business would have to be either on the title, related to the person on the title, or have a long-term lease there.
Great, thank you for clarifying.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no physical hands, seeing no virtual hands, this is before us motioned and seconded properly. And so as we do when we are virtual completely, what I'm gonna do is if you wish to vote no on this, the Rosenberg amendment to the second substitute, I'm gonna ask that you virtually or physically raise your hand. I see no physical hands, I see no virtual hands, so your amendment passes and is on the second substitute. All right, so we have the second substitute amended properly before us. Is there any further discussion? Councilman Parker. No. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, under what circumstances would this? I just wondered under what circumstances.
Step over there.
Under what circumstances would this come back to the Planning Committee? And if there were any amendments on third, would those come before the Planning Committee?
So typically.
Turn me off.
So what happens is. Okay. So what will happen is that depending on what motions are made, right now we have the bill properly before us, and we can take a vote on it now. We can discuss it now. Further amendments can be moved. A motion could be moved to re-refer this. You could request the sponsor to re-refer if there are any substantive changes or amendments, or you could just simply ask him to re-refer if there is any amendments. That is at the will of the sponsor to agree, but it's also the will of this body to vote on whether it comes back to us or not. So are you, does that answer your question? Do you have further discussion? Yes, that answers my question. Great, thank you. Seeing Councilman Rosenberg's hand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I expect to have at least one amendment on third reading. So if anybody on the committee would like it re-referred in that case, then I'm saying that there will be efforts to tighten up the bill further on third reading. So anybody who wants to hear that in committee, just sharing that. Thank you.
Okay. So any other discussion? What I'm going...
Chair, I have a couple of amendments that I've proposed.
I think that's Councilman Dreffel. Councilman Dreffel, is that you?
Yeah, Chair.
Okay.
I submitted a couple of amendments, and I was just checking to see if we would look at those.
It's just so weird because I don't see you anywhere on the screen, so that's fine though. I mean, it's just a voice out there. So you are not on the committee, and so someone on the committee would need to move your motion or move your amendment.
Chair, this is Van Reese. I'll move that amendment.
Right. So if you'll, I'm here in the chambers. We already have had a second and a motion and a second. And so we have Councilman Dreffel's amendment before us. So I will go to Councilman Dreffel to explain his amendment.
Thanks for a couple of amendments. And really, the intent is to just tighten the criteria and as sponsor suggested, ensure bad actors really don't take over this opportunity for us. The first one is really to ensure that everybody permits whether you serve customers or not. I think with the expanded role of some of the uses, that we need to make sure that the neighbors have a good understanding of what may be happening, whether it's the use of the outside building, noise, etc. So my first part of this amendment is to ensure that everybody that has a business on this has a permit. The second part is really tightening up the consequence so that when there's a problem of 2 or more verified complaints versus 3, there's a chance of revocation. It's enough trouble having our neighbors sort of watch over neighbors. I really feel like there needs to be an opportunity where we're going to have this problem. But the bad actors are going to take advantage of taking some time to sort of carry this through. So I really feel like we were able to tighten the consequence. We have a better chance of enforcement. And that's this amendment that I'd like to move.
Thank you, Councilman Dreffel. So we already have the amendment moved and seconded properly before us. I'm going to go to the sponsor to let us know how this amendment, I will go to sponsor Rosenberg to tell us how this amendment plays with his bill as amended, the second substitute, and whether he considers it friendly or unfriendly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Both Councilmember Dreffel and Councilmember Johnston have proposed amendments, and I think that there's some value to what they've added to the amendments. I didn't know about these until they were filed and would prefer to have the opportunity to work with them to put them into a single amendment that accomplishes what we're seeking ahead of third reading. Of course, at the will of the committee. I think that there's, I think there are opportunities to to work them into the bill in ways that would strengthen the bill and I think achieve the goals that they're hoping to achieve. But that would be my preference. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Dreffel, did you hear Councilman Rosenberg? Would you be willing to work with him to roll your amendment into his bill? And then I'll go to Councillady Johnson and see if she is willing to work with the sponsor to roll it in as well. So Councilman Dreffel?
Absolutely. I think, yeah.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Councilman
Okay. Yeah,
Dreffel. Councillady Johnson?
Okay, yeah.
Councillady Johnson, you have an amendment as well. We've not moved or discussed it yet, but you've heard Councilman Rosenberg. Would you be willing to work with Councilman Dreffel and Councilman Rosenberg to roll them all together so we do not have a paper chain, or paper doll chain of amendments on this second substituted, already amended bill?
Sure. Yeah, I have no problem with that. Does that preclude us from me just explaining what my ideas were in committee right now?
Let's go ahead and have you, since both of you are amenable to it, let's go ahead and have you do that. That way, there is some committee discussion of input. They know what's going on, and that way, if the committee has any other ideas, they can also feed it to through our council staff. And I think that would be, then we could, after Councillady Johnson explains her amendment, I think what we should do is recommend passage on second reading and re-refer back to committee for third and final reading. So Councillady Johnson, will you go for explaining your amendment?
Sure. So,
Or I'm sorry, yours is a substitute. For the record, Councillady Johnson is a substitute. So go ahead.
okay. Well, I'm learning procedural, so we'll, whatever. Let me just talk about what my idea was. So as I was thinking about the effects of what would happen or could happen, some unintended consequences in like my neighborhood, for example, my thought was, for example, like with personal care, that let's say I'm a massage therapist, and I doubt I'm going to be seeing more than 6 people a day anyway, because that's a lot of massage hours. And if I'm paying, $1,500 or $1,000 or whatever for some commercial space, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, wait a minute, I've got a spare bedroom. It sort of incentivizes that kind of stuff to come into the neighborhood. And so what I thought about it is, as far as like protecting the neighborhoods the same way we were dealing with the like short-term rentals, in that it really sort of disrupted, I think, more than we were expecting or the previous council was expecting, and it just was one of those things that kind of got out of control. So I thought maybe it would be prudent to put some of those same restrictions on, which is limiting. So I split out the 2 different types of permits. So permit type 1 allows customers, in the same way that Councilman Rosenberg has detailed out with the restrictions and all that kind of stuff, with 6 per day and all that stuff. Type 2 is the kind that is legal now as long as you're permitted. So you don't see clients, the square footage is restricted, all that kind of stuff. And so those I'm not really worried too much about regulating, because they don't disrupt anything. They're not bringing anyone to their house, kind of like me as a real estate agent, or an accountant that really doesn't see, or a graphic designer that doesn't really see clients, it's mostly online, that type of stuff. It's not disruptive to the neighborhood. The type 1, my thought was to limit to 3% per census tract, the same way that we did non-owner occupied short-term rentals in our residential areas, just to protect sanctity of the neighborhood and keep it mostly residential, instead of having businesses run out of every home. Which, would that happen? I don't know, but I would rather protect against it, just to be on the safe side. And the other thing that I thought, that since if you are going to start having customers come to your home, and you're bringing outside people into the neighborhood, and again, trying to protect the sanctity of the neighborhoods and kids playing in the yard and all that kind of stuff, is to notify, in the same way that short-term rentals had to, notify the surrounding neighbors so that they know what you're doing, they can expect that, and also maybe even help with some enforcement, because if they know what's going on and they know you're only supposed to have X number, and if someone's being a bad player, it would help them to understand kind of what's going on. But I just feel like an open communication about what is happening in that home, because they're bringing people in, is the prudent, responsible, and respectful thing to do for the neighbors.
Great. Thank you, Council Lady Johnson. Council Lady Gamble. Oh, yes.
Thank you, Chair. It sounds like, and I'm just kind of processing what Councilmember Johnson said. I'm thinking that, would you require someone who had a party at their home where they have 50 or more people coming and loud music and all of that? We don't require permits for that, and we don't require people to make announcements to their neighbors that they're having a party, even though it would be nice if they did that and invited the neighbor. But it just seems like adding something like that causes more problems and confusion than it helps. And the regulation of already having your limited classification of business, if you were renting a space for $1,500 a month, for example, you're probably operating at a higher level than a sole proprietor. You're at an LLC or some other incorporation, which is not allowed under this current bill or substitute. So it just seems like adding some of these conditions would cause more confusion and maybe contention between neighbors than it would help. And it's something, and in most cases, some of these businesses wouldn't even be as disruptive as neighborhood parties that I see on a regular basis in the summertime. So, thank you.
I get that.
Thank you, Council Lady Gamble. I think that, again, this is why I think it's good that we're having this discussion now, asking our staff to work with the sponsors to roll this into one, and then it will come back before us. Council Lady Johnson, do you want to respond?
Yeah, just, is Council Lady Gamble questioning getting a permit at all? Because I think the underlying bill requires getting a permit regardless. But a party, to me, does not happen as often as 6 clients a day, 6 days a week, possibly. So it's a little bit more regular traffic. I don't think we're having parties multiple times a day. So I just think it's a little bit of a different thing. I understand what you're saying, but respectfully, I disagree that that regular foot traffic coming in from a commercial type business perspective is different than a Christmas party or a house party of any sort.
Council Lady Gamble, would you like to respond? Your name was called.
Yes, I just wanted to say that, no, I'm not opposing the permit. I think that a permit is necessary. It's just the additional, restrictions and requirements of announcing it to the neighbors and all of that is what I was questioning when we don't have that sort of requirement for parties. That, in my opinion, it depends on the time of year in the neighborhood as far as how disruptive parties can be. And in most cases, 6 clients aren't coming to the house all at the same time. They're coming separately in an appointment. So that's all. I just wanted to bring up that point that that this could potentially cause more confusion and contention than it might help. Thank you.
Yeah, I get that. I just think it would be more respectful for your neighbors when that's happening on a regular basis to let them know. And if we require it of short-term rentals, when that's one group of people that's going to come in and stay for a day, several days, up to a week, we're having to notify of that permit. Why wouldn't we have to notify of a permit of multiple people coming in throughout the day, throughout the week?
Thank you, Council Lady Johnson. I am now making a note to not invite either one of y'all to my holiday party. Council Lady Welch.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. When this bill first came up many months ago, I actually asked codes to pull a report on how many complaints we had received for home violations, permitted and unpermitted. And in the last 5 years, they had only received 87 complaints that they could actually cite. So I think that kind of says that perhaps we are thinking more negative things are going to happen than are actually happening with businesses that are exist. I was shocked that it was such a low number. But 87 complaints in the past 5 years. So I think that maybe we are over-worrying. These businesses have been operating already, and we just haven't had that many complaints about people encroaching on neighbors and neighborhoods. So I think my sense is, from the feedback that I've been getting from constituents and others, is that that is not going to change. People simply want to be able to work within their homes and use that space for their businesses, and they have no intent to encroach and don't want to take advantage of that, and certainly they haven't over the past 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Lady Welch. I'm going to go to Councilman Parker for a motion.
Thank you, Chair. I'd move to approve on second and re-refer back to this committee for third.
Great. That is a proper motion before us and properly seconded. So with that, is there any more debate or discussion? Council Lady Welch, is your hand just the leftover hand?
Leftover.
All righty. So what we're going to do now is, it's our favorite time, to raise your hand if you'd like to vote against the amendment, either physically or virtually. There are no physical hands here. There are no virtual hands there. No, we were voting on your motion. So we, just to restate where we were, what vote we just took is that this bill has passed the second substitute as amended with the Rosenberg Amendment, and the intention of this body, of this committee, is that Council Lady Johnson, Councilman Druffel, and Councilman Rosenberg will work together to roll up their paper doll chain to one amendment. So we have passed it on second, and it will be re-referred to planning on third. Councilman Bradford, is that confusion face or is that masked face? Okay, great. Still learning. All right then. With that, Councilman Rosenberg, you are passed on second and re-referred to back to our party right here that is unpermitted in the future. But remember, this is on public hearing tonight, so another good reason to bring it back to this committee is in case things come up tonight. So with that, we will go to item number 3, substitute bill BL 2020-197 by Council Lady Vercher. Is she with us virtually? Oh, I've pressed the wrong thing. Is Council Lady Vercher with us virtually? Okay. Council Lady Stiles.
Thank you, Chair. Councilwoman Vercher did mention,
Oh, sorry. Forget, there's too many devices up here.
Thank you, Chair. Councilwoman Vercher did mention that she wanted to defer all of her bills until August. So I would like to move that this would be moved until the September public hearing.
To the September public hearing.
Correct.
So that is a proper motion. Is there a second? There is a second. Okay, so with that, I will remind y'all that right now we are still operated under our COVID rules because this has been, if you look at your legislative history, it has been deferred several times. But so we will just defer this. The motion is properly before us and properly seconded. So let me make sure everybody's hands down. So we are voting on the motion to defer this to the September hearing. Oh, that's just me talking, okay.
On someone's computer.
If you would like to vote against the motion, please raise your hand physically or virtually now. Thank you, Brad. All right, seeing no physical hands, Seeing no virtual hands, this bill is deferred yet again to the September public hearing. And with that, I will see this committee back at 5 o'clock for our joint committee fun.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.